Good evening. We're just trying to do a quick check to see if everyone can hear. Please could you type yes once again? Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar on Earned Value Management with Informa Middle East. This webinar will be led by Ashraf Kodari. Before we start, I'd like to take you through a few important points. The slides will be available on our SlideShare page and the link will be emailed to you. Also, we will be recording this webinar and we'll email you the link. There will be a post-webinar survey that will pop up at the end. Please do take the time to complete it for us. We will allocate time to address your questions at the end of the webinar because we have quite a few delegates signed in. We have about 50 people signed in. So you can type your questions as you go along throughout the session and we'll allocate time at the end to answer them. In case we have any unanswered questions at the end, we will put them down on email and send them to you. To start with, I'd like to introduce you to the webinar presenter, Ashraf Kodari. Ashraf Kodari is an independent management consultant and has been through senior positions in the fields of utility operations, project management training, training management, facility management, health and safety, all over the Middle East and across the world. He has spent about more than 15 years managing and sponsoring projects and programs in different fields, including utilities, training, construction, organizational engineering, and IT. I'd like to leave it to Ashraf now to take over and take you through the presentation. Thank you. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everyone. Our topic today is talking about earned value management. And the reason that we chose this topic is that traditionally project tracking has been a source of mismanagement for projects. The main reason is the way that we tracked projects. If you look at the screen in front of you, you will find our normal scheduling display tool, which is the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart is normally prepared during the planning stage of the project, and then the actuals of the work are marked against the planned work to see how we're doing as far as schedule is concerned. This is an example of a Gantt chart that has been updated with actuals, and it's showing the current date. The project manager is supposed to make sense of the different progress on the different activities to determine how the project is doing as far as schedule is concerned. At the same time, as we are trying to monitor and manage our schedule, we are also trying to monitor and manage our costs. Traditionally, the cost is being monitored based on the financial numbers that are being received from our financial departments. The financial numbers are then measured against the planned expenditures on that day as per the graph that is in front of you. And if the actual costs are above the blue line, above the budgeted line, the project is considered to be over budget. This caused considerable problems since the actual costs that are paid on a specific time or by a specific time do not really indicate how well the project is doing from the cost point of view, since the work that has been done or the amount of work that has been achieved has not been taken into consideration. The same scenario happens with the schedule, where we have a bunch of different activities with different progress on each activity, and trying to add up the work that has been done from different activities is almost impossible, since each activity is unique. For example, if you were building a building and you had an activity called scaffolding, an activity called painting, you cannot add up 50% of the scaffolding activity to 50% of the painting activity to get a meaningful indicator. As with other sciences that we have, they are based on the mistakes of experienced people trying to be corrected. The biggest project manager in the world, the biggest contract manager in the world, is the US Department of Defense, since they manage projects with billions of dollars every year. In the 1960s, they have discovered this problem and they tried to fix it. So they introduced the cost/schedule control system criteria, which then became called the earned value management system. It was so correct to manage projects using EVM that in the 1990s it was mandated for all the federal agencies in the United States. So what do the words EVM mean? They are referring to management, they're referring to the word value, and they're referring to the word earned. For the purposes of this workshop, we can consider that management, sometimes known as control, is all about measuring a specific value, comparing that value to a desired value that needs to be achieved, and the manager needs to use the available resources to make the measured or actual value equal the desired or the planned value. Management cannot be done without having a specific value that is needed. This value is called different names in different organizations and at different levels. This value can be objectives, can be goals, or KPIs. The process of management depends on us knowing exactly where we are versus where we should be, then analyzing the variance between them, deciding on the actions that are needed to make the measured value equal the desired value, and then monitoring those actions. A more important term, if you will, is the term value. Value is not price, nor is it cost. Value is what someone is willing to pay to get a product, service, result, or behavior, or someone is willing to accept to part with a product, service, or behavior. This is an important definition, as we are going to use it afterwards to understand the common sense behind earned value management. As far as the word earn is concerned, the first thing that you need to notice is that it's past tense. So it is referring to something that has happened in the past. In this context, it refers to resources consumed and product or service has been achieved. It does not refer to a future value, so it is considered a fact, not an assumption. To understand those terms better, let's assume that you as a project manager during the planning stage have estimated that the resources required to finish an activity are $1,000. Let's assume that when the project commenced, activity A has been completed, but the actual consumption of resources was $1,400. you should be able to notice that if you finished activity A, you have earned the value of $1,000 worth of work, even though you have spent $1,400 on it. This is akin to someone going to buy a phone, for example, and the phone's price is $2,000. If the person decides to buy that phone for $2,000, then the value of the phone to the person is $2,000. If the person then goes to buy the phone and in the act of buying the phone, he or she loses $500 more, then the cost of the phone is $2,500, but the value will remain at $2,000. Let's take a closer look at the use of EDM parameters in project management. The base term, the most important term, or the first term that we get is the term PV, planned value. It was also known in earlier versions of the PMBOK as the budgeted cost of work scheduled. This value, this PV parameter, is the pinnacle of all planning that has been done. The project manager going through identifying the requirements, setting the scope, breaking down the scope using the WBS, then defining the activities that are required and estimating the cost that he or she is willing to pay to achieve that activity result in the planned value. It is phased over planned time for the resource expenditures, and it is a future value. It is what we have decided this activity should cost, but it does not constitute a fact. The better our estimation, the more probable that this activity will consume those much resources. This is an example of the planned value curve. The planned value curve could also be called the desired value curve based on the management definition that we're using. It is also known with other names such as the S-curve or the cumulative cost curve. This is prepared during the planning stage, or actually the final step of the planning stage, before the actual work begins. The next parameter that we need to be familiar with is the parameter called AC, or actual cost. Previous versions of the PMBOK have referred to this parameter as actual cost of work performed. It is the real cost that has been charged against our project for the work that has been performed. And normally this value is given to us by the financial departments of our organizations, which do the actual payment of money to the resources that have been consumed. It is mapped to the work packages or the activities in progress or already finished, so that as a project manager, when you want to know how much actual cost has been consumed for activity, the financial department can tell you how much you spent on each activity. Actual cost is a fact. It is something that has already happened. It's not an assumption. So it's a measured value. In front of you, you can see a graph that compares between the planned value in blue, which has been prepared at the end of the planning stage, and the red actual cost curve. Again, the information for the red curve have been gotten from the financial department. From this graph, you can see that the end of the red curve shows us what today is. Everything to the left of today is a fact. Everything to the right of today is an assumption. Having looked at this curve, do you believe that the difference between the red and the blue lines as of today gives us any indication of the performance of the project? If you remember the first slides that we started with financial departments, say that as of today you have spent $13,000, you should have spent $9,000, which means you are over budget. Again, not asking the question, what did we get for the $13,000 that were spent? This is where the term earned value comes to the rescue. Earned value is the number that looks at what did we achieve. What is the value of the work that we have achieved? It used to be called the budgeted cost of work performed. The name is still valid, but we use EV right now. And it says that if you had planned an activity to cost you $1,000 and you finished that activity, then you have earned a value of $1,000 no matter how much you paid for it. It is a past value. It's a measured value, but keep in mind that it's the project manager that determines this when he or she is planning the project. Here is an example of the green curve representing earned value versus the blue curve that is representing the planned value. So for the month of July, we should have achieved work that has a value of $9,000 as displayed by the blue curve, the PV curve. The green curve tells us that as of July, we have achieved work that is worth $7,000. So again, for July, we should have achieved work that's worth $9,000. We have achieved work that is worth $7,000, which should tell us that we are behind our schedule by work worth $2,000. Let's try to fit all of the EDM parameters together. This is what we were looking at. We're comparing the earned value in green versus the blue planned value. And since there is a difference between the value of the work that we have finished and the value of the work that we should have finished, the difference between measured and desired values is called a variance. And this variance indicates an issue with schedule. So our schedule variance will equal the earned value minus the planned value for that particular time. If we plot the actual cost curve versus the planned value curve, the results of subtracting the actual cost from the planned value have absolutely no logical meaning, since it tells us how much money we have spent today versus how much money we should have spent today, but it does not look at the work that we have done by today. Now we combine the three curves together, the red curve representing the actual cost, the blue curve representing the planned value, and the green curve representing the earned value. Comparing the earned value to the planned value will tell us if we are on schedule, ahead of schedule, or behind schedule, because it is telling us the value of the work that we have finished versus the value of the work we should have finished by this day. That's what we call the SV. Comparing the actual cost versus the value of the work that has been finished would tell us how much we paid versus how much we got. So if we paid $1,000, or in this case $13,000, and we got work worth $7,000 as indicated by the green line, then we know that we are over budget. What we thought we're going to buy for $7,000, we bought for $13,000. This is called our cost variance. For the work of $7,000 worth in green that we have finished, we should have spent only $7,000, where in this case it's telling us we've spent $13,000. I would like to stop at this point in time and open the floor for questions. So if you would be kind enough as to type any questions that you'd have, I would be happy to answer them. I believe this is a question that says that AC is measured by the finance department. Yes, that is correct. AC is tracked by the finance department. Normally, and I'm sure there must be some exceptions out there somewhere, a project manager normally does not do the actual financing or payment of invoices. He or she would approve invoices. But the department that is responsible for tracking those is normally your finance department. So once the project has been initiated and the charter has been written for the project, the finance department will have a code of accounts of you, or a charter of accounts that is tied to your project. And every time there's work that is done against your project, they claim that work, and you can ask them to see how much was claimed against your project. The other question that I have is, how is EV measured? EV indicates the value that you've earned from finishing work. This value has been determined by you at the planning stage of the project. When you have your activity list and you start estimating how much resources you need to finish an activity, this becomes the planned value of the activity. If you finish 100% of that activity, it means you have gained 100% of that EV. If you add up all of the activities that you have finished by a certain date, then you have an earned value for that certain date. If an activity is not 100% complete, then you multiply the percentage completion of that activity by the planned value of the activity to get the earned value of that activity. Next question. I have a question that says, how often does one need to do this during a running project? This is referring to the resolution of monitoring that you choose on your project. The thinking of how often you need to do this is normally started at the time that you are doing your WBS. When you're breaking down the project, you keep on breaking down the deliverables into more manageable chunks. As a project manager, you need to determine how much detail do you need to be involved in, and that is where you determine your work package. Normally, you decide based on the size of the project, how often you want to do the monitoring. For example, if you had a project that in total is estimated to consume 100 person hours, it is not conceivable for you to monitor only twice. For example, 50% and 100%. Because if you find out during the monitoring that you are way off, it is very hard for you to recover. So if you have a 100 person hour project, it is conceivable that you're gonna break it down into 10 chunks of work, for example, right? And if the project is supposed to take 10 days, then a daily monitoring seems to be appropriate. If it is a higher risk project or a higher criticality project, you might want to monitor every half day. But this is the rule of thumb that you would use. I have a question that says, can I get a copy of the presentation? Yes, after the presentation, it will be available to you and an email will be sent to you to tell you where to get it from. Looking for the next question. The question says, if there are errors or mistakes during planning stage, then how can we correct them? Very valid. One of the biggest discussions that happen all the time is what some organizations traditionally do, where the project manager does a mistake in planning. Then when the mistake becomes apparent, they do what's called re-baselining the project. In my opinion, this is totally incorrect. What we need to do is maintain what we planned. That does not change. That is our project baseline. We measure what we are doing against the plan. As we are doing this, we are collecting data on our variances, if you will. Then we try to find out the reason for the variance so that we can try to fix it on the upcoming project. For the current project, if the project was planned incorrectly, then there is no doubt that the project will not end up as per the desired values it started with, because they were wrong at the beginning. The first step is to actually inform the stakeholders, primarily the sponsor, and let them know that the planned numbers for the project will not be achievable, and leave them the decision if they should continue with the project or not based on the business case. As you build your database of reasons for error, your organization and yourself will become more mature in finding why the errors have occurred and eliminating them one by one. And moving on to the next question. The question says, EV is always expressed in terms of monetary numbers or any other forms as well. To my knowledge and based on my experience, we always measure EV in monetary units. I have heard of people that measure EV based on person hours. I have not tried it myself, and I will try to find an answer for you and hopefully send you this answer if it does work for them or not. Again, to my knowledge, the standard for earned value management dictates that you are going to use monetary units because it really unifies the variances both for cost and schedule in monetary units. And the gentleman is asking about more details on computing the EV. I will refer you to the EV standard, Earned Value Management Standard, and I would be happy to send you more on the details other than saying that it is normally computed as % complete multiplied by the planned value of an activity, aggregating all of the earned values of all of the activities until the date in question. The next question is, what if the variance was because a customer-driven change? That is a very critical question. If there is a customer-driven change, normally referred to as a change order or an approved scope change request, number one, we need to understand that the enemy of projects, the actual terminal illness of projects, is normally the scope creep, where the scope of the project keeps on increasing in an uncontrolled manner, and all of a sudden a project manager is trying to deliver a much bigger scope with the same cost and time. To combat this, a project manager must strictly adhere to preventing any uncontrolled scope changes. which leaves us with a controlled scope change where a customer or even your own organization requests a scope change and it is approved. If this occurs, for all intents and purposes, this is a new project. Every calculation that you've done, every planned value that you've put in place, every resource that you have scheduled was dependent on a specific scope. Literally, you're planning, first answer the questions, who do I need to please, identifying the stakeholders. And the next question, what do I need to produce, which is defining the scope. And based on what do I need to produce, then I start preparing how long is it going to take and how much it's going to cost. Once this base, once this scope statement, once this foundation has changed, all the planning that is following that also changes. So if there is a scope change request, this is the time where the PV curve itself will shift and we still measure ourselves against it, which means the variances you calculate from that point on will still be valid. Next question, when measuring earned value, should you include expenses and project management costs? Absolutely. And the way to do this is when you are preparing your work breakdown structure, the WBS, normally the first cut of the WBS is based on major deliverables. So you take the first box, which represents the scope, and you break down the components into the major deliverables of it. There are other ways of doing it, but if we consider major deliverables, then definitely one of the first boxes that you have to put in at the top level of a WBS is what is known as project management. You see, the WBS is supposed to display all of the components that would result in the stakeholders being satisfied. And if you put in the components beside each other without having the project management, it is impossible for the customer or the stakeholder to be satisfied. If you put a box that says project management at the top level of the WBS, later to be broken down either by process group, for example, what we do during initiation, planning, execution, etc., or you break it down by the knowledge areas, which is time management, scope management, cost management, whatnot, you will end up with specific activities that are assigned to the project manager and the project management team, and because they are activities, they're going to show on your project network diagram, they're going to show on your schedule, hence will be represented by the PV curve, which means that the EVM calculations will include those parameters in there. The next question, how do you measure the earned value for the sub-delegated project tasks? Whether the task is being done by the performing organization or a subcontracted organization, I believe that's what was meant by the sub-delegated project tasks, should really not matter, because what you will be asking for is you need reporting both on the completeness of an activity, the percent complete on the activity, and the actual expenditure of resources on it. Once you have those, the EV, because of the completeness of the activity or the percent complete of the activity, and the actual cost, which you will get from either your financial department or the subcontractor's financial department. In either case, since you have those two parameters and you have the original planned value for the project at a specific point in time, then the EVM calculations should also be included. Two questions that's saying how's PV estimated and how's EV measured. PV is estimated during the planning process of the project, which in sequence goes by identifying the stakeholders, followed by identifying their needs, their requirements, preparing the technical solution, which represents our scope, then breaking down the scope into smaller components using the WBS until we reach the work package level. Then we decompose the work packages into activities, and we estimate the resources for each activity, or the cost of resources. To estimate the cost of resources for each activity, we have multiple techniques. The most common of those techniques is subject matter experts, literally asking subject matter experts. We can do it using parametric estimation. We can use vendor bids to tell us the estimated costs for the activities. These estimated costs for the activities, notwithstanding the risk calculations we can do later, are the planned value for each activity. You aggregate the planned value for the activities to reach the planned value for the project. And once you create your schedule, if you spread that over time, then you know the planned value of the project at any point in time. The next question says, can we track rework expenses on the EVM? I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly what is meant by the question, but I'm going to assume that an activity has been completed. It did not meet our quality requirement, so we had to do the work again. If this is what is meant by the question, then again, if you do the activity again, then it is incurring higher costs. The AC for that activity becomes higher. Also, if the activity does not reach the required quality metrics or the specifications that the activity should have ended at, then the activity is not complete, which means that what you have earned from that activity is less than the planned value of the activity, which means it gets tracked in your EVM calculations. I believe that the rest of the questions are going to take much more time to answer than we have for this webinar. So I would like to thank you at this point in time, and I will ask you that if you had any more questions to kindly send them, and we'd be more than happy to answer those questions, and you will also be receiving the link to download the presentation. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll meet in a different webinar in the near future.